Good morning, everybody. My name is Tanya Quigley. I'm a partner at Cerini Associates, and I work with the firm's not-for-profit and employee benefit plan clients. I'll be your moderator for the succession planning panel. And then with me, we have Ron, who's the Executive Director for Community Housing Innovations, Amy, the founder of Book Fairies, and Paul, the chairperson on the board of directors of Variety Child Learning Center. So each of these panelists have either gone through the planning or in the carry through of succession planning. So I'll have each one of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we can go into the questions. So Amy, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Amy Zaslansky, and I'm the founder of Book Fairies. Started about 11 years ago, and we provide books to under-resourced areas across Long Island and the 5 boroughs. We just celebrated our 4 millionth book donated, and our goal is to ascend to 1 million books a year.
Thanks, Amy. Ron?
Ron Abad, CEO of Community Housing Innovations. We're a not-for-profit based in Long Island, New York City, Hudson Valley, and Westchester, close to 100 million in operating budget. We do homeless shelters, affordable housing, permanent housing, supportive housing, first-time homebuyer program. I've been CEO for a little more than 2 years, but have been in a not-for-profit and government space for close to 30 years. Excited to be on this panel.
Thanks, Ron. Paul?
Hey, good morning, and quick thank you to Ken and Kellyanne and you, Tanya, and the whole team for yet another great service to the nonprofit community. I retired about 3 years ago after about a 50-year career in the media business here on Long Island. Managed radio stations, and for over 20 years, I was with Newsday as Vice President of Public Affairs. And throughout my entire career, for both personal and professional reasons, I've been on quite a few boards, notably United Way of Long Island board for over 25 years, and specific to this workshop, on the board of Variety Child Learning Center for also over 25 years, and took over as board chair a couple of years ago.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so we have some set questions for our panelists. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the webinar chat, and then we can ask our panelists those questions. So the first question, Amy, is for you. As a founder of an organization, and there's a few pieces to this question. As a founder for the organization, how did you know it was time to step down? And how did you handle the initial of letting go? And can you explain to us the process of transitioning out?
Sure. So, well, Book Fairies started 11 years ago. I knew probably within the first year or two that I was going to need to transition out. I had the potential to take Book Fairies to here, and I knew that it could go up to this point, but it wouldn't be under my leadership, purely because it's not my skill set. My skill set is more of that starting founder role. And so when I knew that I was going to be transferring out, and I had heard about founder syndrome, so these are some of the things that I've come across when I ended up transitioning and giving that over to our illustrious Eileen Minogue, who has done amazing and just won through the Imagine Awards. But here are some of my recommendations. Is the first thing, learn about founder syndrome, learn from people who have gone through it, what their advice is, what the mistakes are that they've made. Definitely do your research so that way you know where your pitfalls are going to be. Think about your future role within the organization. If you choose to stay, which I do recommend, but if you do choose to stay, think about why you're staying. Is it because your identity is so tied into the nonprofit that you're not able to separate out, and you're staying because you think the organization is going to fail without you? So if you stay, think about how you still want to be involved and talk that out with your board and the executive director to make sure that everybody is in line and in agreement with what the roles and responsibilities are going to be. That kind of goes into creating a job description. So that way everybody understands exactly how you're going to be involved. You have very clear boundaries and limits. There's almost guardrails in place. As a founder, You have so much passion and enthusiasm, and you just know this nonprofit inside and out. And sometimes it's really hard to be able to step back and understand you're not doing the day-to-day operations anymore, that you need to be more higher level. I think that was the hardest part of stepping out of Book Fairies, because your ideas are still popping and your ideas are still coming. So creating that job description just sets those boundaries up. The next thing is figuring out the best way to transfer over your information. The easiest is just all those files going over. But like I said before, you know your organization, it's ingrained in your DNA. So there are so many aspects that you do innately. And figuring out with the executive director, what is the best way for you to communicate everything that you know, and really understanding that you're a mentor to the executive director. So while you may want to have a constant flow of communication, the ED may need a couple months to settle in first before they start hearing all of your thoughts and ideas. They may not. They may want you right by their side so they can have constant questions, emails, phone calls. And again, that's where setting up those boundaries so everybody is very clearly understands how you're best going to communicate, how you're going to transfer that information, how you'll continue to support the executive director and the board of directors. I know for me, I had wanted to take a giant step back and step out of the board and Book Fairies as a whole. And what the board and Eileen had said is that I had too much historical background on the organization, that it could be detrimental if I did take that big step back. And along with being detrimental is understanding that when the new ED comes in, they're going to do things different. I liken it to loading a dishwasher. And you put your dishes in one way and somebody else puts it in another way, and really looking at what is it that the executive director is doing? Is it harmful? And at what point do you need to step in? Or just because the plates are in a different direction, is everything still getting clean? So if there are problems, if as the founder you see things going off the rails or going in a direction you're concerned with, that's what your board is there for. And that's where you would go to the board and express any of your concerns. We happen to have a fantastic board chair, Jim Joy, and he really helped keep everything in line in terms of both the tell it to me straight, which you see, and forming, storming, norming, performing. We use this a lot. You're forming together. Storming, there are going to be conflicts between an ED and a founder. It's just the necessary process. So understanding that there is going to be a little bit of conflict and how you handle it. And then you start norming until you get to the point where hopefully Eileen and will agree we are performing. But it helped to have Jim tell it to me straight at times and to be able to keep me within my boundaries as well. So those are my recommendations and how to handle founder syndrome.
Thank you, Amy. This question's for Paul. So your organization just went through the process of selecting a new executive director. Can you explain a little bit of what that process looked like?
Sure. And before I start, just very quickly, in all my experience with nonprofits, I've been aware of and involved in quite a few examples of what you call founder syndrome. Amy, that was really impressive, the way you approach that in a very smart and somewhat humble way, where you really put the interest of the organization first. So there are a lot of good lessons in what Amy just said. Specific to Variety Child Learning Center, which is a school for young kids with autism and other special needs. The school was founded in 1966. The founder then was Judy Block, and we went through our own transition from the founder, but that's not the point of this conversation. 1966, the school was literally one room in a church basement with 20 kids. And just 9 years after Judy founded it, I'm talking about 1975, a young, new special ed teacher, Jan Friedman, came to work for the school. And fast forward 47 years later, Jan had a great career with Variety Child Learning Center, rose up through the ranks. Ultimately, when Judy retired, Jan took over as CEO, and really a remarkable tenure. And through those years, of course, the school grew from one room and 20 kids to a much bigger school with over 300 kids and hundreds of staff and a couple of different campuses and so forth. And at the end of 2021, Jan informed the board that she was ready to retire. She gave us, luckily for us, gave us about a year's notice. And of course, those of us on the board thought that Jan would never retire, would live forever, and everybody would go on happily ever after, but that was not reality. And we certainly understood that this was both a cause of some anxiety, but at the same time, it represented an opportunity for the board and for the organization, and we wanted to look at it that way. First decision we made was to hire a search firm. And while that was an expense and not everybody agreed with incurring that expense, I and a number of others felt it was important for us to lend a degree of objectivity and professionalism to the search. And it certainly worked out that way. So our first search was for a search firm. There are quite a few of them out there of all different stripes and types. And we settled on one, hired them, and they've got search firms, as you may know, have their own very specific process as to how they approach this. And the firm we used had a very impressive process where they began by getting input from stakeholders, staff, parents, board members, other constituents, people in the community, and so forth. And the search firm gave us the opportunity to have much broader outreach for applicant recruitment than we ever could have had if we just had the search committee, which was 4 or 5 of us on the board. And it kept us organized and gave us the opportunity to screen a lot more candidates. And I think it kept the whole process more equitable. So the search firm began, and over the course of a number of months, after getting all the input that I described, they developed a profile of what the ideal CEO would look like and what are the most important competencies that the board really was looking for in the next leader of the organization. And then they started the outreach and recruiting candidates, screening candidates, going through that whole process. And I also wanted to point out, on a parallel track, in addition to the very professional, organized, structured search process with the firm, we also went, I'll say, old school by spreading the word. I always like to say Long Island is a big place, but it's also a small town. And a lot of people know a lot of people. And the more we spread the word that Jan Friedman was retiring and we were doing a search for the next great leader of Variety Child Learning Center, we kind of shook the trees, and that elicited a number of applicants as well. So with the direction of the search firm, we reviewed the applicants, narrowed it down, interviewed the finalists, and ultimately the search committee made a decision, recommended it to the board, and it was approved. Obviously, there were a lot of criteria that were important to us. Most importantly, we have an organization with a tremendous history and heritage, and we needed to find a new leader who not only had the required management and leadership skills, but also somebody who would respect the history of the organization, yet not be married to it. And that was the delicate balance that we were looking for. I can tell you, happy ending to the story, or happy beginning now. We hit the jackpot. Janet Koch, who many of the people in this workshop probably know, has a great track record with a number of nonprofits here on Long Island. in various leadership positions. Janet started the end of last year, is off to a great start. I told her that the honeymoon is over. She hit the ground running, and we're just thrilled with her leadership. We did have a couple of months of overlap with Jan, which was great. And we're also very fortunate that our longtime CFO, Andrea Rieger, who had also announced her plans to retire, she agreed to stay on and is still with us for the time being, which has made it a much smoother transition for Janet.
Thank you, Paul. You might be going through this process again in a little while. So you mentioned that you had a search committee that's made from the board. Does the search committee keep the board up to date through the process?
Yes, we did. And this was a situation, as you might imagine, where the rest of the board, we don't have a big board, it's only about a dozen people. The rest of the board had to trust and have confidence in the search committee, which they did. It really worked out very well. And selecting the right people for the search committee is critical because we needed to have people who had professional experience in interviewing and hiring, and not everybody has that experience.
Right. We do have a question in the chat. Organizations go through life cycles. How does that get factored into the search?
Well, this was, as I said, 50 plus years, we were looking for what would only be the third CEO of the organization. So the life cycles, if you want to call them that, for this organization were very different than most. And that both, created, it really put a lot of pressure on this process because it was beyond an important decision. It was probably the most important decision that the board had made or will make for some time. And it worked out well.
Thank you, Paul. Ron, the next question is for you. So you successfully transitioned into the role of an executive director of an existing not-for-profit. How involved in the process was the former executive director? And what policies were in place that worked, and what processes do you wish the organization had in place that they may not have?
Sure. I actually went through the process that Paul explained. It went through what the ED was previous ED was actually the founder and the only ED. So served for 30 years. I was a successor, the number 2 CEO or ED. The previous ED worked with a search firm and went through a very thorough process. And I believe and know that I met the profile and the credentials because I've been doing this work for 30 years. I was previously a chief operating officer, a senior vice president, assistant commissioner in this housing space. So I met all the checks, I met every criteria, all the qualifications, et cetera. So he was fully involved in the entire process. And then we transitioned to Amy's slide. Amy's slide was just brilliant. It was brilliant because I lived every bullet point you put on that slide. Founder syndrome is real. So particularly if you're the founder and you never left and you're the number 2 and you're hiring for your number 2. So that was important to learn that, to founder syndrome, make sure that you really want to leave, before you begin a succession plan. And I recommend if you're a founder of an ED, of an organization, make sure that you have a plan in place before you even begin the recruitment process, right? Really, really settle who you are as a founder. Where do you want to go? What's your involvement? What's your new job description, like Amy mentioned? And really decide before you even hire a search committee or hire a Paul, right? Or hire a headhunter, or a search committee, et cetera. Really get an understanding of how do you want to transition? What's the vision? What's the plan? And then pull the board in for support. Because if that's not clear, you can create a conflict with the new executive director, the new CEO. Because no new CEO wants to be the chief operating officer. You want to be the chief executive officer. You want to be the executive director. You don't want to be the deputy executive director. So sometimes as a founder, you struggle because you want to maintain the position of being the leader, the founder, the CEO, the ED. And now you hired someone who's going to succeed you, but you haven't released. which oftentimes can hinder the new CEO from really growing, from establishing their own shoes, their own footprint in the organization. So I went through that personally. And because of that, I had to very quickly, no honeymoon period, very quickly state and very boldly state, I'm the new CEO. This is my organization. I respect the past and I respect you, but I'm the new leader. I'm not the number two, I'm the number one. And I had to share that, I had to voice that through work very quickly, all throughout, going to site visits, meeting all my staff members, visiting every site I have, across the counties, really getting a feel, communication and communication. I succeeded post-COVID coming back. And since we were in Long Island, Hudson Valley and Westchester, I really had to get out. I had to really go out and visit folks and establish a new vision, a new mission, maintaining to the core of housing as, to the competencies that we do, but really establish immediately that I'm the new leader. And I had to have that conversation with my board and with the founders as, you hired me to be the new leader. Either nicely step back or I go on somewhere else. It was a tough choice. And I think they respected that I positioned myself in the sense that I have the credentials, I have the background, I have everything you want, I have the passion and the commitment. I just need that mentor relationship like Amy mentioned. But I would like to define the job description as well. What do I need from you, founder, for me to succeed? How can you invest in this partnership so that I'm successful? What are areas that I can, what's our relationship going to be like? So if I need advice, if I need feedback, I can touch base with you. So greatest recommendation is that the founder has to really release to give the new CEO, the new ED, the opportunity to grow. You could also often hinder progress if you're holding on to the past. Systems I put in place. So immediately I had to create a strategic plan. We were a 30-some-year organization with no real strategic plan that looked forward. We had a lot of systems in place. We had a lot of folks in place, a lot of old programs, and I had to immediately communicate and become the chief communications officer of my organization. That's what I am as a CEO, the chief communications officer. So daily touch bases, a lot of conversations, a lot of lunches, a lot of emails clarifying this is what we're about. Did a SWOT, did an agency SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I didn't have to hire a consultant. I did it myself, my leadership team, and said these and covered every area: fiscal, operations, IT, HR, marketing, communication. And I said, we're going to evaluate this. We did it in 1 month. We built a strategic plan internally. We didn't have to hire a consultant. And then I just went on a mission to communicate internally, externally, with friends, with partners, social media, and say, this is our new plan. This is the new community housing innovations, the new CHI. This is where we're going, et cetera. And then we had to release some people. We had to, over time, release old staff who were not producing or not productive. And I had to bring on new team members, really, to be part of the new vision and a new plan. And it took tough work. And it was bold, but it was needed. And I'm proud of the work. And in 2 years, we grew the organization by 3 times. I started at a $30 million operating budget with 250 employees. Now we're close to 100 million with 600 employees. And it took a strong team. It took a lot of communication, and it took some bold action and investment into expanding into New York City, and not just Long Island and Hudson Valley and Westchester. But the founder syndrome is powerful. It's really, I understood it, but I used to say it was like a 30-year-old young man living in his parents' basements. It was time that he get his own place. You know what I'm saying? It was time he buy a suit, get a girlfriend. And that was how CHI was, it was like, so I was the new leader to really make them grow up, make CHI grow up, really expand to the next level, the new life. And it changed me, it changed the organization, and the ultimate reason really, so that we can serve the hundreds and thousands of families and individuals that need shelter. Hundreds of families that want to buy their first home, in Westchester and Long Island. Thousands of people that need permanent affordable housing all over the county. I needed to do that so that we can better serve the people that we serve. My role as a CEO is to make sure that we're focused on helping the people that we're hired to help. It's not about me. It's not about my individual board members, which they count. It's not about the founder. It's about our mission. And our mission, from a very prudent, fiscally based, but strategic approach, was to focus on excellence for those that we serve. So I had to make some bold moves immediately. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. That's a lot of helpful information and a great story that you told us. So that's strong leadership, definitely in the CEO role that's needed. So
Absolutely.
we do have a question for you, Ron. So your past CEO joined the board. How did that work out? And what are your thoughts on the past CEOs, on former CEOs sitting on the board?
Yeah, we went through that journey for a while because that's part of the process as well. Initially I was like, it's no different, right? For me as a leader, is like I still sort of have to report to you in one way or another. Eventually he transitioned off after a while. But I do, from my vantage point as the new CEO, it's good to have the relationship, I think, as Amy, to describe, have that job description really at the beginning, lay out what are the expectations. Because ultimately, even though you want to respect the founder, because it's the founder's organization, it's their baby, right? The new CEO needs to have the space to breathe, needs to have the partnership to put that person's your own identity on board. And if the CEO is on the board, it's just an extension. It's sort of an extension of the founder syndrome in many ways. So eventually we had to have that conversation about, whether this is my board, my new board that I would want feedback and trusted advice from, that can counsel me moving forward, et cetera. And I think just to have the CEO maintain the board is their way of maintaining ties. And it could hinder or impinge on a new CEO, new ED really growing and developing your own board.
Thanks, Ron. So this next question is open up to all three. So what advice do each of you have for an organization starting to go through this process?
I've got a couple of quick thoughts on that. Actually, I think for the board, it begins before this process begins. I would encourage every board and every executive director, even if they're not looking at the end of their term at that moment, start the conversation early. And as long as everybody is professional and candid with each other and trust each other, it's it's really important to have that conversation begin early and start to play out some what if scenarios. What if there's a planned transition? What if it's a sudden transition due to some circumstance? And tied to that, ideally, if an organization, and not everyone has this, what I'm about to describe, but if there's a way to have the internal structure set up in a way that there is a potential successor or two being groomed, being developed. It doesn't mean they're definitely going to get the job, but ultimately it makes for a much better transition if it's somebody from within as opposed to having to go outside. Not every organization has that opportunity or luxury, but and many companies in the private sector have learned that they really need to do succession planning when they're looking at the career development of internal staff over a period of time.
And just to follow up with that, it is a lot harder when you're a much smaller organization and you only have 3 or 4 staff members who are in very different segments, whether it's program or logistics or book bank coordinator. And their roles and goals may not be to lead up to become an executive director. And then to go back to what Ken had said, when you are looking for whoever that next person is, what is it that your organization really needs at that point? Is it someone who's much stronger with fundraising? Is it someone who's much stronger, significantly stronger with growth or building a stronger foundation? And just like you would do with board members and writing down exactly what you're looking for, write down a wish list of everything that you want in the ED, specific for that time while forward looking. But you really are looking to grow into that next segment and hire the right person with that skill set that you need.
I'll say, to add to Amy's slide, I say if you're the founder, clearly define guardrails and boundaries, right? So if you're the founder should lay out and says, I will be available for the next 90 days or X number of days. These are the things that I could advise you on, right? This is what I would be available, how I would be available. These are the times that you can contact me, right? These are the sources of things that you need to know or need to work on immediately. Clearly define that before hire, right? If you're the person becoming the new CEO and you're succeeding a founder, clearly lay out during the search process, ask questions. How much authority will I have? How much do I have to defer to the founder or the previous ED? What's the role? What will be my role? When, what's the relationship with my board immediately? If you're a board member, I think you have to have clearly defined guardrails and boundaries as well. What do we expect from the new ED? What do we expect from the old ED, right? What don't we expect from both, right? So clearly define. I think that will help everyone in the process if these things are at least laid out in writing, not super detailed, because you sort of have to have guardrails or boundaries, right? As opposed to like being very granular, but that sets up a framework that every party can work with. And will make everyone successful. It would make the founder really release and go into the horizon, right? The new ED really work well and ingrain his or her culture, her mindset, or leadership, and the board still have the authority, the fiduciary responsibility they have, and the great partnership that will be needed between the new CEO and the board to make it a very successful organization. Clearly defined framework for all parties.
Yeah, I would agree with that, with the executive director who's coming in, making sure that the board and the founder, whoever is before them, knows what your goals are for the new ED. Have set up what you expect to do within the next 30, 60, 90 days. So that way, if the board thinks you're headed in one direction and you haven't even touched that yet, because you're going in a different direction, it's just all about communication and making sure that there's a clear plan that the ED is looking to follow, and then the board can follow along with that mindset.
Those are all really great points for an organization to seize this as an opportunity, not just a challenge, so to speak. There are some interesting sort of attitudinal and behavioral things going on. The outgoing leader has to let go, and
That's right.
That's tough. And it's the role of the board, sometimes just the board chair one-on-one, to help that person understand that they're going to need to let go. And that's a process. You don't throw a switch, as we've all experienced. And for the incoming leader, they need to be firm. They need to assume that leadership role in all the ways that Ron described earlier that he's done. And at the same time, they need to consistently demonstrate respect for their predecessor, respect for the heritage of the organization, and respect for the staff. And that will go a long way in terms of establishing their credibility and for people to trust them in the way that they're going to need to be trusted to truly lead the organization.
Excellent points, Paul. Because it's not just the founder and the new CEO and the board, it's the staff. It's the people you serve. There's a spillover, right? If there's great tension between the three, right, it spills over to the staff. If there's great harmony, it spills over to the staff, right? So it should always, like I say, always be focused on our staff and the people or the product, the people we serve or the product that you're providing, right? Sometimes in these conversations, it gets stuck on personalities, right? And during the process I went through, I always daily, every morning remind myself, why am I doing this? You know, why am I passionate? Why have I been doing this for 30 years? Why am I stepping into a new role? Because of the people that I serve. And then the new staff that now are expecting me to provide what I believe in my management style, servant leadership, right? I'm there to serve them, to support them, to build a team. If they feel the tension, if they see disharmony, if they see lack of clarity, it spills over into the work that we do. And ultimately, you know, like I said, to the people that we provide, the services, the products, et cetera, the housing that we provide. So it was very important during this tension. I think Amy's portion was it forming, norming, was it forming?
Forming,
So,
storming, norming, performing.
brilliant. That's exactly what I lived. I mean, that was brilliant. Forming. Totally, I went through each process, each season, you know, each step there. But all along, I knew it's about my staff, right? It's about there. So it gives me the opportunity to create a new culture, right? To be a leader and establish a new footprint out there. And it's that we honor the past, we honor the founder. I actually honored the founder. And I did a public award honoring, you know, naming him as an award for a future leader in our organization, an annual award. Figure out ways to constantly honor, right, the organization, our great history, but also had to say we're moving forward. We're going to the next life. So we honor the past, to Paul's point, right, and respect the past. But now we have a vision to carry to the next step. And because of that, this is our new plan.
And part of that vision is one of the things Amy was talking about earlier, which is making sure there's a clear definition of where the organization is going. And the
Right.
board needs to all not just understand that, but they all need to support it.
That's
And
right.
that's got to be defined throughout this entire process. So there's no ambiguity and everybody understands what the expectations are of the new leader. And I think, Ron, you mentioned SWOT analysis, and certainly all four of those pieces are critical
Right.
for a new leader, especially the opportunities and threats. They
That's
need
right.
to understand that even before they accept the offer, so that
Absolutely.
there are no surprises and everything's on the table. And that also helps them develop the roadmap for their first 100 days, first 12 months, et cetera.
Exactly.
A lot of great points, you know, theme that I see is work as a team. You know, everyone is on board for the same mission, the same goal to have a successful transition from former to new. So that's great that, you know, you guys all have had, you know, pretty good experiences with that. Okay. So I think we touched upon a lot of, you know, the process of, you know, transitioning. We talked about the different qualities that you look for in a new executive director, when you should start the process, and how involved the former executive director should be. Those were additional questions, but we seem to kind of touched upon that in, you know, as we are, you know, openly discussing the process. So if there's anything else that anyone wants to add to, you know,
Well,
to the,
I mentioned earlier about the new leader. The new CEO really needs to get his or her hands dirty, right? You really got to get out there. You got to get out of your office. You got to meet your staff. You got to meet your employees. You know, the people that you serve, the product. You really got to set your foundation, set your footprint very early on. It's a delicate step because you got to respect the past, right? And respect folks that have been there for years. You got to do it, but you got to establish yourself. It's very important. You can't wait 6 months, a year to establish yourself as a new leader. You really got to establish yourself from day one, I believe, and do it in a way where you're not bringing great new ideas on day one, but you're sort of really putting it out there that you're excited, you're passionate, you want to learn about what you do, you want to really get to know the team, you want to build some trust and respect amongst the team, but you want them to know that you are the leader. right? That you, and what type of leader is a supportive leader, a servant leader, but they need to know that you're moving forward and you're not just waiting around for someone to tell you what to do. You got to establish your footprint very early. There are different ways, different styles. It's based on different personalities, management styles, et cetera. But you got to really communicate that you're the new leader. You don't know everything. You will never know everything, but you're really passionate about getting to know everything, getting to know it.
One of the ways that the search firm was really helpful, I may have touched on it earlier, was in keeping us on the board very focused and disciplined when it comes to creating the profile of what the ideal new CEO needs to be. Not necessarily looking at the outgoing CEO and saying, well, he or she has been great, let's just find a clone of that person. That would be too simple and would really have us miss out on the opportunity to move the organization forward. So creating that profile and identifying those competencies that may be different. The outgoing CEO in many cases is somebody who kind of grew into the job and the job sort of grew around them. And maybe that was fine for their tenure, but might not be the right skill set or mix of skill sets that are needed for the next incarnation of the organization. So it's a really, for us, I know, and I'm sure others who have been through it, it was a really interesting process to clean slate, take a fresh look at the organization where we've been, but especially where we're going, and what are the core competencies that we're going to need from this point moving forward. And it doesn't matter if they're the same or different from the outgoing CEO.
And I would also talk to the founder or the person that came before and just see what their future goals were. As a founder, you're so busy juggling, setting things up, meeting people. So many founders are, as Eileen likes to say, accidental. You know, I had no idea that I was starting a nonprofit. I'm an occupational therapist. So had I known what I was getting into, things would have been structured very different. But talk to the founder, find out what their goals and visions were, where they saw the organization headed, but they may not have had the resources, the time, or the knowledge to get it to that point. They just knew that that was a future goal of theirs.
One of the issues that we face, I don't know if it's come up yet in this conversation, I don't think so, is what role should the outgoing CEO play in the recruitment and selection process of his or her replacement? And this was an interesting one because everybody's head was in the right place. The Jan, who was leaving after 47 years, had a wonderful attitude, wanting nothing more than just to see the organization in good hands. But one of the very smart people at the search firm told me that it's a delicate balance because what we ended up doing, by the way, is having the outgoing CEO, Jan, meet with and have a conversation with the person we selected to replace her, but not interview her and clearly not be part of the decision. And what I learned in that was that you don't want the new CEO to think that she was, in this case, she was selected by her predecessor. She has to understand that she was hired by the board. She can get information and background and a sense of the culture and all that important stuff from her predecessor, but that it's a fine distinction, but a very important distinction. And I was glad that somebody educated me about that, and it worked out for the best.
You know, it is hard because both of you are in positions with a much larger organization. And coming from Book Fairies, where we had just enough money to be able to fund an ED for 1 year, and we needed an ED who was brave enough to take a leap of faith with us. And it depends on the board. So in a perfect world, that would be wonderful to have the board choose who the next person that's coming in. But the majority of our boards are, and not speaking about how Book Fairies are, but a lot of people don't have the strongest of boards and people who have that understanding invested interest in your mission when you are a smaller organization. And the ED, while it would be great to say that they should not be involved in the process, I think they are the driving factor to make sure that that the organization is finding the right person to take that next role. So it looks slightly different when you're a small startup foundation versus a much larger organization.
Thank you, Amy. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to end the webinar now. But Amy, Ron, Paul, thank you guys so much for being our panelists today. You gave a lot of helpful information. So thank you very much for joining us.
Great.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
all.
us.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.